Welcome to this, the February update for the Year in Our Garden series. Now, it is the beginning of March and I'm a little bit late bringing this update, largely because I've been busy with quite a few other things and it's been hard to find the time to come and film. This morning is a beautiful sunny morning, which is following yesterday's rain, where it rained for the entire day. Beautiful, gentle rain and a really good amount. We had 70 millimeters in total, which is almost 3 inches. That means that the dry of the summer is well and truly over. This year's summer dry wasn't as dramatic or as impacting as it is some years. While there were some quite warm periods, some days and nights that were hot, there was also, particularly in February, a lot of nights that were quite cool. And overall, I think temperatures may have been just a little bit below average, though I don't have any statistics to prove that. The cooler temperatures at night meant that things were a lot slower in their development in the garden. But over February, there has been things coming into cropping in our garden, and that means that the month was largely devoted to harvesting in garden activities. So one of the first things that I'll talk about are these climbing beans here beside me, where we began picking them and they are now cropping quite heavily. They need to be picked every 2 or 3 days. They're really delicious, these blue lake climbers, and I really recommend them to anybody that likes some beans. They're so much easier to pick than bush beans. The other thing was the cucumbers. Now, I harvested both these that are outdoors and also in the greenhouse. There was a lot came there. Look, over the month the production was really good. So many that we really couldn't eat them all and had to give some away as well. They are beginning to slow down now because the season is beginning to cool and passing. They've done a lot of production. There will still be some for quite a while, but the production is now slowing. These outdoor cucumbers particularly go off quite quickly because the outdoor growing season is very short, and you'll see how they're yellowing off now. So there'll be a few more, but there won't be a lot more outdoors. But we should still get quite a few more indoors. The tomatoes also began to ripen during the month, and the first to come were the little cherry tomatoes, the gardener's delight as they're called, that are growing in the straw bales in the greenhouse. They ripened first. Look, there's so many there, and it's like, you know, harvesting nests of eggs. Heaps and heaps of those to consume. The next to start ripening were the outdoor ones that I had planted from seed, and they began producing some early in the month, and now there's still some there. There has been more loss with those because I haven't cared for them. I haven't staked them at all. Now, this is a lesson I think that is there, that I read this in a book some years back, and look, I don't always get to it, but anything that actually gets them off the ground is better than nothing. And when tomatoes are left to sit on the ground, you're going to get a lot more loss. But you get them up, like I use this trellis system with the concrete reinforcement, and it gets them off the ground and it gives them some protection, and there's far less loss from this crop. Now, these ones here behind me are beginning to crop too. We've picked a good bucket off them already, and there's going to be a lot more now over the next month. So a lot of March is going to be devoted to dealing with tomatoes, making them into a sauce, maybe bottling some, and certainly eating stacks of them. In terms of the pumpkins, I'm somewhat disappointed with the crop that it's looking like at this stage. There are some there, but there's been a lot of the later development ones that haven't set, and I suspect that's due to the cooler night temperatures that we've been getting in February. So I think this crop is going to be below my expectations, but that's the way gardening is. Sometimes you get what you expect and sometimes you don't. We haven't harvested any of this sweet corn yet, but it's looking really fantastic, and I suspect that we'll be eating some before this weekend is over. Let's have a look. Yes, it's beginning to colour up there now, so within a couple of days we'll have our first feed of sweet corn. You can basically tell when sweet corn is ripe by the fact that it begins to fall down, and also the silk goes dark, but you might sometimes at the early stages have to open it up like I have here and actually check what's going on. Once it is more advanced, you know, within another week, you can very confidently predict that they are quite mature and ready to eat. But in the early stages it's always a little bit harder when they're just starting. But with this amount, it's really important, I find, to start eating early, because there's quite a lot here and we're not likely to actually get through it all before it matures. What is pushing the boundaries, getting a little bit too mature towards the end, we will take and freeze, but that probably won't be a great deal, but there will be some. But in the meantime, we'll have quite some feasts of sweet corn. Sweet corn is something we don't generally buy. We eat it when we get our crop. It comes and it goes, and really when you're eating from the garden, that's one of the things that you get to experience, is that seasonal change in your diet. And I think it's both good for you, and it also keeps your diet interesting as you go through the year. One thing I've been interested to observe is the development of this sweet corn in the greenhouse. And as we saw outdoors, it's just coming to harvest. This is really growing along fantastically, and you know, in the last month since we did the last update, you'll notice how dramatically it's grown, and I'm expecting we'll start to see it, you know, in the next month tasseling and starting to move towards developing some corn. I think it's going to work, but it is still early days. We'll see how it goes overall, but I think it's going to actually work to give us a late crop that will come in following the outdoor corn. Another crop that is going really well this year are the capsicums, or peppers as they're often known. Let's see if I can pick one here. They really have developed fantastically this year, and there's nice crop on. Now, I was asked to talk about growing these by one viewer. Look, really I can't claim to be a highly experienced grower of capsicums or peppers. Quite often I haven't had good success. I generally only have success here in the greenhouse. I don't get it outdoors in our climate. I know there's other people in Tassie that do grow it outdoors and do okay. But I've grown a couple of different types. Often I grow the longer, thinner type indoors, and they do quite well too. This is the second year that I have grown this traditional bell pepper type and had them grow really well indoors. Now, what have I done? Simply lots of compost. This actually had mushroom compost on this bed, and keeping the water up also I think is really important. Now you'll notice that there is covering the ground here sweet potatoes. I didn't actually plant these sweet potatoes this year. I grew sweet potatoes in here last year, and these are volunteered. So I've decided to let them go, and we might get something off them. We don't know yet, but they don't seem to be harming the growth of the capsicums, which are doing really nicely. And we've been enjoying quite a few of these through February. I thought we should take a little look at this main summer crop of potatoes. You'll notice that there hasn't been huge change from last month. There is beginning to be some yellowing and some dieback, but there's still quite a lot of good green growth here. I'm always delighted to see it when the potatoes really last and don't die off quickly. I've found that what that means is that in the soil there's generally some really good tubers, nice big ones, and it's continuing to feed and develop healthy large tubers. And so I'm expecting quite a good crop from this. I expect before March is over, however, I will begin to dig these potatoes, and then we'll see actually what comes out of the ground. Another thing that we have begun to harvest during February is some apples. Now this is Arcane, which is an early variety, and it's a great one to grow if you do want some nice early eating apples. They don't really keep very well, but look, eaten fresh, they're quite delicious and quite crisp and crunchy. A white flesh, smelling really nice now as they begin to ripen. So they've been harvesting for a couple of weeks and will continue, well, with the amount that's on here, probably for another 2 or 3 weeks more. We generally can't eat all that's on this one tree and often give lots and lots away. With the apples that come later, the ones that keep better, we put into storage. But these ones, well, it's a time to just enjoy them and let your friends enjoy some as well. I expected these blood plums to actually come into harvest during February, but only now at the beginning of March am I beginning to pick them. As I said, the cooler nights I think have slowed things down, and these blood plums are often quite deceptive. They really have to get quite dark to be ripe enough. So look, you can think, oh, they're nice and red, I'll pick them, but they're still quite firm. You really need to wait with these ones, which is Satsuma, this plum, till it's really a dark purple, and then it's ripe and ready to pick. Now that we've begun to pick them, it means over the next 2 to 3 weeks I'm going to be quite busy getting these into some bottles. We'll eat a few fresh, but the majority of this crop will need to go into bottles, and we'll eat it over the rest of the year. But the prunes, the improved Dargan, did come into picking in February, and the bulk of them have now been picked and eaten. There's still a few there that'll be picked over the next week or so. They're really a delicious fruit. I've talked about these before, and look, if you don't grow them, I do recommend that you have a go, because they are just so sweet and tasty, and you'll really enjoy them. The other fruit that has begun to pick right at the end of February are some pears, both the Nashies and also these Williams pears. With the Williams, it's best to pick them when they are still a little green on the tree, not to wait for them to go yellow. If they start to yellow on the tree and fall off, they'll often be brown inside. So pick them a little bit early, let them ripen indoors, and you'll get most of them. They're a really tasty pear, the Williams. I really enjoy them, but not a good keeper unless they're okay to bottle, but yeah, they need to be eaten fresh very quickly, because otherwise that brown factor will send them rotten quite quickly. So that's what's been happening in our garden in terms of harvest. In terms of planting, not a lot really has gone on. The only thing I planted in February, which was earlier in February, was some seedlings that I had grown of this kale, which was some seed that my nephew had given me of a perennial kale. So I put a few out here, and they're really starting to get going now. I do need to thin them back a bit. There's some white butterfly around, and you'll see a few holes. I'm not overly concerned at this stage, because that part of the season will move off quite quickly, and I think they'll outgrow those. Now, coming up amongst it is spinach, which, if you recall, I had some spinach in here that I'd taken out. I'd let that go to seed, and a lot of it has fallen down, and there's a lot of spinach coming up, so that'll give us an early crop of spinach. I have others that I have now planted out that I grew from this seed, but this lot will probably come first to harvest. So I don't mind a bit of spinach coming underneath the kale. I think they'll coexist quite okay. So, what else has been happening in our garden over February? As always, Elizabeth's flowers have been delighting us, and roses have been the dominant thing across the summer, though the dahlias have also been coming out, and there's plenty of colour around, and it keeps things looking really attractive. One of the jobs I took on early in February was to trim back this wisteria. And look, it's a job that needs to be done pretty much every year. I don't always get it done as well. This year it required quite a radical job, and the methods I undertake are probably not that safe, but it's basically what you need to do to deal with something as large as this. If you don't keep the wisteria under control, it will take over and really make an absolute mess of your garden. So it does require that regular trim back in summer. Look, I think most people probably wouldn't want or shouldn't plant vines as big as this in their garden unless you've got the energy and the dedication to actually work on it in this way and trim it back each year. Don't plant rampant vines like this. What is a better option for most people and most gardens is probably to grow something like clematis, which is easier to maintain, or if you want wisteria, to grow it in this way, where Elizabeth here is actually going to train this as a standard, and that way it's much easier controlled because it's going to be a smaller bush and cut back to tighter levels, you know, not running as a vine. And that way you can enjoy the wisteria in a much smaller space and with a lot less effort and less danger than climbing ladders and using hedge trimmers on boards and things like I do. Now, one of the interesting things that happened in our garden during the month of February was that the eucalyptus trees, or gum trees as we know them, flowered. They don't all flower, and they don't flower to the extent that we had this year every year. And look, it's like every 3, 5, or even sometimes 7 years that you get a large number of the forest flowering. And it's really nice to see when there's a lot of them out in flower. The bees are really happy because there's lots of food around. Okay, so that's been the update for February. March, well, it's well underway now, so hopefully won't be too long. In 3 or 4 weeks I'll be back with a March update. It's going to be quite a busy month, but mostly dedicated to preserving the harvest that is coming in.